Wookie would like you to know that this is the 40th episode of Qatsyr Harvest as we pursue the conditions around and an explanation of the Shabuah harvest, which is the next mikre to be fulfilled. And to understand the conditions surrounding it, and particularly the attitude of God's people prior to it, and probably after it for the next better part of 7 years as well, through the prophet Hosea, the prophet that Yahweh, interestingly, asked to marry a temple prostitute, a whore, a religious whore, so that God's spokesman would have empathy and would have a better understanding of exactly what God himself has had to endure in dealing with Israel over this chasm of time. And he said the government and religious leaders, the Sar, the ruling authority figures, the highest ranking officials, it's from Sa'ar, those who act like royalty as lords with an assumed right to control and claim power for themselves. Now, Sar and Sarar aren't necessarily pejorative terms. There are places where I'm designated as being a Sar of Dode. So to be a leader who is serving the king and one through whom he can delegate and get things accomplished can be a positive thing. But in this case, God has made it real clear that he is denouncing government and religious leaders. And so he's saying of them, as they pertain to Yehudah, the beloved of Yah, Judah, they are perceived as untrustworthy and disloyal deviants. They're sug, alienating and backsliding proponents of circular reasoning. That's probably not an endorsement. I will pour out a boundless amount of my righteous indignation and intense displeasure with an outburst of my disappointment upon them, as if it were fluid, continuing to be poured out among them. Call it a baptism of rage. This is not a good thing. When God views the most revered individuals within Israel, the government and religious leaders of Yehudah, as untrustworthy and disloyal deviants. And when he says, I'm going to pour out my intense displeasure, my righteous indignation upon them as if it were plasma, that means that Israel is listening to the wrong people. And that it's time for Israel to make a significant change if they're going to be at the family reunion, which is just 8 years hence, and be part of God's family. Boy, we are really doing our best here, Wookie. Pretty soon you're just going to speak right into the mic and you're going to replace me, aren't you? No, Dad, you're not replaceable. Okay, well, thank you. I appreciate the endorsement. Yahweh has displayed his great animosity. And this righteous indignation of God remains not only directed towards Israel, but particularly the political and religious leaders of Israel. And just look how misguided they have become. I mean, they're literally fighting for their right to exist. And yet Israel is torn apart. It's a wicked house divided with some 20-25% of Israelis being progressives, and rather than holding the Muslims accountable who invaded and tormented them, disgraced them, humiliated them, raped, abducted, tortured, mutilated them, committed acts of mass murder, they want to blame their government. And then you have the Haredim who say, no, we're just too busy being religious to be bothered with any of this. And oh, by the way, you can't just expect us to serve Israel in any way. You need to pay for us to do nothing on behalf of Israel. Pure parasite. It not only accomplishes nothing, not only gives nothing back, but actually draws the lifeblood of the nation. This is Israel. And on the political and religious side, God sees them as worthless, as deviants. So in this case, Sar denotes government officials, religious leaders, the authority figures within Judah. It offers the impression that they have acted as if they were royalty, designated by their God to rule. They believe they have the right to impose their will on everyone else, restricting the choices of others, all, of course, to control them. The evidence that Yahweh was correct with the overtly political progressive left, vying against the ultra-Orthodox right, Israel is being torn apart as we witness the nation today. It's not only being plagued by a flood of Muslims from all around, but right from the inside, she is being dissected, cut up, divided, without an ethical leader to be found among the millions. Even the top brass of the IDF, the Shin Bet, the Mossad, have failed miserably and can no longer be trusted to defend the nation, which is about to implode under adverse world scrutiny and subjugation. God's assessment of Jewish political and religious institutions, or parties and sects, is that they are untrustworthy. They are corrupt. He calls them disloyal deviants, which sounds like he must know them pretty well. He takes issue with their propensity for circular reasoning, which is a divine gift, I guess, or perceived divine gift of the rabbis. And he views them as being irrational and disingenuous. Boy, was that ever true as it relates to the progressives. He does not care for their dishonesty or for their egos, nor do I. This assessment is particularly relevant in the context of Shabuah and Towrah, because it is from the sewer of malfeasance and of anti-Shemitism, adversity towards God's name, that the participants are being withdrawn for these harvests. And it is only after removing them from this malignant influence of Judaism and progressive politics that a remnant can be reached. And that is why our review of Hosea, leading up to our evaluation of the prophet Yoel, is so crucial to the Choders and the Zeroah's ability to cultivate a productive Qatsyr with so much rotten fruit hanging on the vine, the tree, and in the field. Being misled and swayed by politics and religion, even conspiracy or patriotism, is a guaranteed way to waste one's life and lose one's soul. But it is not a crime. Misleading others is. And it's an offense worthy of divine judgment. Therefore, Jewish religious stalwarts and the progressive proponents have engendered Yahweh's wrath. The torrent of his animosity is going to flood down upon them in mountainous waves of righteous indignation. And it is appropriate. It is deserved. The very men and women who pretend that they speak for God or that they speak for democracy are the most displeasing to him. And yet, he is a proponent of God and of free will, but not false gods, and not of control, veiled in a pretense of choice. Now, that is especially true for the rabbis because their Torah is the Talmud, and in it, rabbis shout over God. Ephraim, the worthless speck of carbon ash, is deceived and defrauded, extorted and oppressed. His competence in exercising good judgment is incapacitated, and his ability to reason is shattered. This is because he is insistent on, agreeable to, and fixated upon giving away a variety of worthless religious dogma. Dogma is not a bad thing. Dogs can be good things. Dogma is a bad thing. Okay? No ma at the end of dog. Got it. So here we have Ephraim, which would really be northern Israel today, that part of Israel that is been largely abandoned while Jews try to deal with the attacks of Hezbollah, the part of Israel that's going to be the most vulnerable in this next wave of attacks. God saying is deceived, defrauded, extorted, and oppressed. Now, the kinds of things that deceive and defraud, extort, and oppress, to the extent that they would be discussed in this context, are really two. They are religion and politics. If you were to expand from there, you could probably get into patriotism, societal customs, and in Israel, because of the universal presence of the IDF, to the military. They can deceive, they can defraud, they can extort, they can oppress. I typically have no quarrel with the IDF, particularly the rank and file. I do have a major argument against the officers. And for those who are listening to this program on my Facebook page, you know of the post, a very long one, that I presented regarding a father of a young man who literally lost his head to the Muslims who perpetrated October 7th and invaded Israel and witnessed their savagery. And when you read this man's evaluation of what he witnessed, because he saw the entire videos as they were captured on GoPros by the Muslim jihadists, their rapes and mutilations, their tortures of little children, even the beheading of his son with an AK-47, severing his head from his shoulders and neck. And when you hear a man who is trying to provide a sober assessment of his son's sacrifice to defend people who, in terms of leadership positions, betrayed him, it's a tearful read, and yet it is an essential read, because I'm not sure there's a much more honest portrayal of what has become Israel. And I can assure you, and this is exceedingly important, it's why God is speaking out against his people. He is warning them that you have been defrauded, you've been extorted, you've been oppressed, and that you've lost the ability to exercise good judgment, because the next attack is going to be far worse. And the IDF has learned nothing about how to deflect it. They continue to buy fast and fancy airplanes, which were of absolutely no value on October 7th. Nor were tanks, Apache helicopters, armored personnel carriers, F-15s, F-35s, the Iron Dome, none of it. No part of it. Even the fancy pants, high-tech security fence was useless. The IDF chain of command, worthless. The Shin Bet, the Mossad, completely useless. And they have learned nothing. They haven't even taken responsibility. But more importantly, they buy all this fancy equipment, spending billions of dollars on weapon systems that they will never use because they're not the appropriate tool to deal with a religious insurgency that invades on foot and motor scooters. There's this bereaved father, his name is David, said, I love his name, said over and over again that the overwhelming preponderance of those who behave so savagely, conducting the rapes, plundering, abductions, gleefully torturing little children, parents, forcing parents to watch the mutilation of their children, raping women, gang rapes, tying their legs open, breaking their pelvises, continuing to rape them in agony, cutting off their breasts while they're still alive, then raping them after they're dead. Woman, and while she is still alive, cutting her belly open, pulling out her fetus, and then slicing the unborn child to death, giggling, screaming, Allahu Akbar. He knows what Israel can't seem to admit, that the demon that is antagonizing them is Allah, it's religion, it's Islam. The problem is Quranic. That the destruction of Hamas is meaningless. It's simply a symptom. It's like combating cancer with aspirin and saying, you know, if I can solve the hair loss, the patient will be fine. It's like you're going to treat Ebola with talcum powder. No. You've got no clue, Israel. And you're going to want to blame God for not defending you, and yet you're not defensible. That's the message here. It's your own goddamn fault. And, you know, I spend better part of each day on X and on Facebook trying to awaken God's family, his people. And you're dense as that wailing wall that you bob your heads into. Recalcitrant. Stubborn. No matter how many times I share Yahowah's name, I can't get a single person who didn't come with me or hasn't read my books to acknowledge Yahowah's name. No matter how many times I tell even the stalwarts who are defending Israel that the problem isn't Hamas, it's Islam, not one is willing to accept the truth and respond appropriately. I haven't had a single positive response and damn near 10,000 posts to somebody actually taking me up on it and reading the 5 volumes of Goddamn Religion that explain the nature of this monster that Yahowah specifically asked me to write, that will save Israel from the carnage of Islam, and that are completely free at yadayah.com and gondamreligion.org. And these are people that post all day, so they can certainly read and write. Not one will take the time to do anything but change their profile pictures or come up with a clever new way to become ever more popular. God has anointed and appointed his answer. He has chosen and equipped his response. But if people still aren't listening, what's it going to take, Israel? I deceived from the northern kingdom of Israel is deceived and defrauded, extorted and oppressed. His competence in exercising good judgment is incapacitated. Ability to reason is shattered. This is because he has been intent on and agreeable to, even fixated upon, going after a variety of worthless, religious, idolatrous dogmas, human excrement, revolting filth, utter nonsense, unsubstantiated ideas, fake gods, futile and vain, blah, blah, blah. That's the truth, Israel. Can you handle it? Is there going to be someone in Israel, someone who will stand up, shed their ignorance, accept Yahweh by name, realize that Dod is the Messiah and Son of God, and that he fulfilled Pesach, Matzah, and Bakurim, that Shabuah is on our horizon, and that God's return is only 8 years away, and that the enemy of Jews, indeed all mankind, who will preclude you from seeing God's return, is Islam. And that they will read Yada Yahowah. They will read goddamn religion. They will read Twistianity, and they will come out of it empowered and enriched and enabled to wield words wisely. Because you gotta know that continuing to bomb Gaza is counterproductive. You're turning the entire world against you, and you're accomplishing nothing. Nothing. In fact, what you're doing is counterproductive. You're manufacturing more Islamic jihadists who want to slit your throats and rape your women and abduct your children, even your grandparents, than you are eradicating. Bombs is not the answer. This is not a military force. It is a religious farce. Judaism remains one of Israel's greatest impediments. It is crippling. Rabbis through the ages have incapacitated Jews to the extent that their thinking is debilitated, their choices are restricted. They're all hung up as to whether or not a utensil touched both ends of the cow, the meat and the milk, as if a cow must be a very confused animal to have both of these things mixed together in one beast. You're fixated on the wrong thing. You've turned the Shabat into the most crippling day of the week, where there's 1,000 rules about what you can't do, as opposed to the one thing you should do: celebrate your relationship with Yahweh. You've made a mess of every one of the Moed Mikre, corrupting their intent, even ignoring them. You've erased Yahweh's name. You've written him out of your life. You've turned God into your enemy. And when all of this is presented clearly to you, you reject it, just as you did God when he spoke directly to you 3,400 years ago, and you told him to shut up and go away, that you didn't ever want to see him or hear from him again. And then you run around pretending that you're the chosen people. Well, you can't be chosen if you don't choose God in return. The productive are defrauded, they're extorted, the faithful are slaughtered. The result is a sea of parasites adorned in black. But don't gloat. Should you be draped in the rainbow colors of the sexually perverted flag, because you're no closer to the truth. In this regard, by the way, I don't really care if somebody is gay or miserable. I don't care what your sexual orientation is, so long as you're not telling little children that they should mutilate themselves and become transgender, which is suicidal. I don't care what you do among yourselves, so long as you don't do beasties, incest, pedophilia, engage in rape. I don't really care. But when you make your sexual orientation more important to you than your relationship with God, or exercising good judgment about the very survival of your country, that there's something terribly wrong with you. In this regard, it is my expectation that while both sides of this sectarian secular divide will agree to slander Yahowah's Nakri, his voice, will overcome the many, but not until we are right up against the final deadline. Judaism and progressive politics will ultimately cease to exist. Rabbis are about to become extinct as social influencers. My lovely wife was only once told that she needed to go work out her grievances with Judaism with the rabbi. And when the rabbi, and she was a child at the time, made sexual advances towards her, she said, "I will never do that again. The hell with a lot of you." Over the past 2 decades, the original versions of Questioning Paul and Prophet of Doom, well, they have changed thousands of lives worldwide, providing those who suspected that there was something dreadfully wrong with their religion to discard the doctrines that have sought to control them. However, realistically, jihadi Muslims are incapable of reading what has become goddamn religion, preferring instead to prove the peaceful nature of their cult by threatening to kill me and others, particularly Jews. And of course, Questioning Paul, now updated as the 5 volumes of Twistianity, devastates the religion that has harassed God's people for 2 millennia. It has the audacity to replace Yahowah's beloved Son and Messiah with the mythical misnomer, Jesus Christ. And it's something that Almighty God will repay in kind as he disowns them. The Wookiee has officially checked out of this program, but his co-producer gets upset if I call him Union. Surprising to many, but nonetheless conclusively demonstrated in Christianity and in goddamn religion. Rabbis were largely to blame for the emergence of Christianity and Islam. In fact, I would say they're wholly to blame for the religion of Christianity. If Paul had not been trained as a rabbi, his 14 letters could not have been written. And without those 14 letters, there are no Gospels, there is no New Testament, there is no religion of Christianity. There is no replacement counterfeit for Dode David. So rabbis are entirely responsible for the Christian New Testament and that religion. I say they're also entirely responsible for the religion of Islam. They're not entirely responsible for the terrorist cult and deadly enterprise of Islam. Muhammad had that pretty well licked. He was a very accomplished terrorist, mass murderer, slave trader, and thief, as well as pedophile and rapist. So when it comes to just immoral, vicious, sadistic behavior, that's all Muhammad. But the religiosity of the Quran is entirely based upon what rabbis sold to Muhammad as Talmud recitals, which Muhammad then twisted to serve his agenda. Without those twisted Talmud stories that give the Quran this pretense of religiosity, there is no religion of Islam. Islam is nothing more than what Genghis Khan, Kublai Khan, and Tamerlane perpetrated. It is a cult of personality that breeds ruthlessness, but it wouldn't have been perceived as a religion. Had rabbis recognized and celebrated the arrival of Hamashiach, Zerah, and Ben El, and fulfilling the promise of Pesach, Matzah, and Bikurim, and had they not outlawed the use of Yahweh's name, Shaul, Paul, would have failed and Christianity wouldn't exist. And had rabbis not sold Babylonian Talmud readings, the Quran would have been perceived as a pamphlet on how to rape, plunder, torture, and kill, but nothing else. And Islam would have died with its warlord. As for Israel, the people's inability to think rationally has been a direct result of their favorite pastime, which of course is being religious. And having wallowed in human excrement as if it were a bubble bath and worn it as fine perfume, this nonsense has been the only sense that Jews have held dear. And it has taken them to a place where they can no longer acknowledge Yahweh by name or his son, Dod, by title or acclaim. God says in Hosea 5:12, I am like a moth, perceived as something fanciful and fabricated. I am thought to be a sick creature, a rotten, nocturnal insect to Ephraim. And much like a fungal parasite or a septic infection to the household of Yehudah. This is God's understanding of what religious Jews and secular Jews think of him. That's powerful, isn't it? That God, who knows his people best, recognized that his people actually despise him. Many think he's someone who is fabricated. Others think he's no more real than a nocturnal insect, a moth attracted to their light, like a fungal parasite, a septic infection to the household of Yehudah. Israel, I know him. I know him better than anyone on earth today. I know him better than anyone in the past 2,500 years. And I can tell you he does not deserve this. You should be ashamed. And it's well past time that you change. God's assessments, of course, are valid. and his testimony is accurate. Rabbis in particular have written their own Torah, superseding Yahowah's, while scribing themselves into the starring roles. As a result, the religious are so bedazzled by their own perceived brilliance that they hardly notice that Yahowah exists. And so it's little wonder that the relationship necessitated a divorce. And what the rabbis don't know is that God chose a goy to serve as the means of reconciliation. Yes, Dowd is returning on the day of reconciliation, and he is the Messiah and Son of God who fulfilled Pesach, Matzah, and Bikurim. But the remnant of Israel has wallowed in this religious crap so long that the stench stinks to high heaven. And they need to be purged of this. That final remnant needs to be scrubbed clean. They need reconciliation with Yahowah. And that is the role of the Adamah Parah, the man from Edom, who will save many by preparing them for God's return. And that is what is ending this divorce. You see, the Adamah Parah prepares the adulterous woman to be betrothed to Dowd, the bridegroom, who is the king of Israel.
You're his best man.
But that was both then and now, that at God's urging, I am begging Yehudim to return in advance of Shabuah, of Towrah, and Kippurim. Yahowah intends to honor his promises no matter how undeserving the beneficiary. Therefore, there are still 3 opportunities to come clean and to come home. And one is a double portion. Yahowah is on record vowing to reconcile his relationship with those who have continued to view him, well, most unkindly, in a highly unflattering way. Won't even say his name, which means his focus remains on Yisrael, even though Yisrael's is diverted from him. Collaboratively, we are encouraging Jews to capitalize upon these 3 remaining Moedim with the wealth of information we are providing, the willingness we are to awaken God's people. Well, the willing can be prepared to recant their prior positions and accept Yahowah. And they can do so between now and May of 2026, as well as between now and September and October of 2033. Albeit realistically, the receptive will be few and far between. The harvest will be of a great many comparatively, since prior to our engagement together, there were none. So 2 would be good. Well, 1 was good from Yahowah's point of view. 2 is wonderful. And, well, 3 would darn near be a crowd by comparison to the silence over a better part of 3,000 years. But the political and religious have woven together these entangling webs that make escape difficult. So it will certainly not be the majority. So Ephraim perceived that which was associated with his religious malady and his sickness, and Yehudah his oozing and pestilent wound. But then Ephraim went toward Asher, reaching out to the greatly contentious and adversarial despot. But neither he nor this could repair the damage you have done to yourselves, nor cure you from the infectious disease that you perpetrated and that continues to ensnare you. Hosea 5:13. So God says, you're certainly capable of perceiving the fact that you have a religious malady, that you're sick, that you are able to recognize that you have an oozing and pestilent wound. But rather than returning to Yahweh, you would rather go off to Asher. Jews think that with their axis of evil, if they could just go after Asher, which is today Iran, and bomb Iran, that all would be good in the hood. Oh, the axis of evil would be gone, and we could all get along as, well, infighting progressives and Haredim and surrounded still by Muslims, but nonetheless, the axis of evil would be broken, and kumbaya, baby. No. Going after Iran is going to make things worse, not better for you. It's going to put the world on a footing for war in today's parlance. And I've written extensively about it and shared on social media exactly what we're up against right now and what this will precipitate. And so here's Yahweh saying, no, your problems, these maladies and sickness and this oozing pestilent wound that you're suffering, Israel, is not going to be resolved by going off to Iran. You know how it will be resolved for those who will find resolution? Going the opposite direction and turning to Yahweh. Rather than bombing Iran, embrace God. But that's difficult for you because Israel, you remain so unbelievably contentious and adversarial. But neither he nor this could repair the damage you have done to yourselves. Yes, indeed, you are not going to find the cure for the infectious disease that you perpetrated and that still ensnares you. How did you perpetrate it? Oh, I thought I just told you that, didn't I? Your rabbis created Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, and they have been your nemesis. And going after them now isn't going to help you. You need to return to Yahweh. And it was in leaving him that you created your own enemies. Yahweh's indictment of Israel and Yehudah reveals that deep down his people are aware of the damage that they have done to their relationship with God and to themselves. Religion has sickened them, and the disease has progressed, such that Israel has become, well, hideous from the vantage point of heaven. Imagine God looking down and seeing the progressives that are more enticed by their sexual peculiarities than anything else, protesting, but without anything to offer. Imagine God's view of the Haredim that want to be parasites and yet won't lift a finger to defend Israel, claiming they speak for God when they shout over him. This is the Israel that God sees. It's the Israel that created the enemy in your midst, Islam, the enemy in your past, Christianity, and your greatest foe of all, Judaism. And so here, Yahweh is using a historical example to foreshadow a current event, as is his style. Yahweh is saying that their degrading exile in Assyria made them more adversarial and contentious, not less. The damage was all-consuming and largely irreversible because the virus of their own design had affected almost everyone. And of course, it was the Israelites that were taken by the Assyrians into that region. They're the ones that wrote the Babylonian Talmud. They're the ones that sold Talmud stories to Muhammad. They're the ones who created Islam. They're the ones who have made a mess of Iran. God's very smart. And he can weave a story together that explains your future and your past. The damage is all-consuming. You've done it to yourselves. It was suicidal. And as today we witness the rage of progressive and Orthodox Jews screaming against one another, against the state of Israel, in opposition to Yahweh. And the worse their situation becomes, the louder they squeal, the more Israel's religious foes, Muslims, are motivated, inspired to inflict the final blow, the final solution from Satan's perspective of his Jewish problem. There is always a consequence to political posturing and religious rebellion. This is from Hosea 5:14. As a result, I will be akin to a roaring lion, to Ephraim, and like a conciliatory lion approaching the family of Yehudah. I myself will tear up or tear apart. Then I will either walk away or lift up, such that nothing will rescue or snatch away. Hosea 5:14. Well, if you look at the front and the back cover of this book that I'm holding in my hands, or at the top page of a browser, and you read Qatsyr harvest, you will notice that there is a golden lion there on the covers. Now that is going to be replaced by Yahweh's menorah. You can see it over my left shoulder at his request. And while Yahweh is identifying himself in this instance with this symbol, it is mostly the symbol that he has used to represent Yehudah. And this isn't Yada Yahowah. It's Yada Yahowah, which is why he asked that we switch to the symbol of his menorah. And while that lion does represent the most acclaimed of all Yehud, Dod. In fact, it's Dod's name that we find in Yehud. It is Yahweh and Dod, the beloved of Yah. And while Dod is the apple of Yahweh's eye, our Savior, our King, our Messiah, the very Son of God. Right now, this is a tussle between Yisrael and Yahweh. I am the intermediary. I am the messenger. But the belligerents in this story, those who are banging heads, are Yisrael and Yahweh. This is not a battle you can win, Yisrael. Your head's not that hard. And God is much bigger and smarter than you. Stop banging heads against that Western wall. Stop banging heads against reason. Stop banging your head against God. Open up your mind. Open up your eyes, open up your ears, change your attitude, listen to the voice of Yahweh, read the words of Yahweh, embrace the truth of Yahweh, and you will live forever as his children in his home, enriched, empowered, and enlightened, even emancipated by him. That is his promise, and I'm delivering it to you accurately and forthrightly because he wants you to accept it. I thank you for listening to this, the 40th episode of Qatsyr Harvest, and I hope you choose to join us on Shabuah.